Well, welcome to our webinar today, brought to you by the Signatory. My name is Kristen Hammett, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us as we talk about purposeful events. Before we jump into today's topic of personal events, please engage with us on Facebook. After today's webinar, go to our Signatory Ministry Services Facebook group where you can learn more about events, talk about topics more in depth, and learn from each other. Our goal, as you've heard me say before here at the Signatory Ministry Services, is to equip you in your development efforts and partner with you as you develop those donor relationships, and you can look to us as a key resource for training, community, and partnership. Now to today's topic. And I'll be honest with you, planning an event is really how I got into the work of donor development. I think events can be very powerful and they can be a great tool for donor development. In my own experience, they were a great on-ramp for donors to be introduced to the work that we did, to learn about our ministry, and to partner with us financially. But it was also a key opportunity for us to begin relationship. I will be honest with you as well. Sometimes we did this well, and other times we dropped the ball. Today, we are going to learn about meaningful ways to engage donors strategically and how to manage an event well to optimize it as an opportunity to relate and connect to donors. I am joined in the Signatory office today by Tracy Nice, owner of Stancy Events, an event management company that specializes in events for nonprofits and businesses. Tracy has gained insight and proven strategies from more than 2 decades in event planning, and she's going to share a wealth of information with us today. Before I hand this over to her, I want to remind you of a few things. The first is primarily I want this to be a conversation. Tracy and I met last week and kind of went over some of this information, and we conversed about a variety of points. And I want to really invite you in today to be a part of that conversation. So when you're looking at your screen, you'll see that Q&A tab in the bottom toolbar, and we will be looking for your questions there. I'll be noting those, and as it relates to something that Tracy is talking about, we will kind of take a moment to certainly discuss your question there. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this presentation over to Tracy. Tracy, welcome.
Thank you so much. So when we talk about fundraising events, we talk about them with excitement. We gather together our supporters and our sponsors, and we welcome new people to your cause, and hopefully we garner a significant fundraising boost. But we really want to ask, are we getting it right? How can we move beyond the fundraiser and shift focus to a sustainable method? Events should be an opportunity for sponsor engagement. Through a shared experience, we hope that people who may not have known you existed a week ago will take up arms and join your cause. And if you're just hoping to toss 300 people into a room who will each write you a $200 check, you're going to have to expend that energy all over again next year, and you miss a tremendous opportunity. So let's talk about what the strategy, planning, and methods look like for a more sustainable model. So we focus on sponsor engagement. We're asking attendees to do more than just open their checkbook. We're asking them to also open their address book and become ambassadors for your cause. Laborers outside of your immediate circle of influence. When the technology, service, atmosphere, and experience all come together as part of your story, we create a purposeful event. And we use the time, talents, and funds that have been entrusted to you for long-term gain. We're shifting thinking from fundraising to sponsor engagement or sponsor acquisition, and you have to shift your overall approach too. Because engagement is not something that happens naturally in a room of 300 to 1,000. So you'll spend time investing in more intimate ways to develop ambassadors who will work alongside you. Think table hosts or small groups, and sometimes independently on your behalf.
Tracy, can we take just a second? I have a question. On the last slide, you said something about this momentum with 1-year plan. Can you explain to those who are listening what that means?
Absolutely. So when we think about hosting a big signature event or any event, we really want to talk in terms of on-ramp and ways that we're moving people more deeply into engagement with the organization. So I might have a big benefit dinner, but 2 weeks later, I want to plan a volunteer orientation night or a tour of our facility, a way that people can move deeper in something that is an invitation to the next step.
I really like that. I think that's maybe where, when I talked in the intro, how I sometimes would miss the boat on engagement. I think sometimes, and I would imagine those of you who are listening who've planned an event have a nodding head right now. You kind of get busy with all the details and the event is complete and you kind of want to check a box. And really, you need to have a strategic plan for how do I continue to engage these people that have attended. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Absolutely. And we're talking about, you and I spoke that each of the events really need to assume that you have a certain portion of people who have never even heard of you before. And so we're introducing them to your organization. What's the next step? They were invited by a friend or wrangled by a friend to attend a benefit dinner because their friend is passionate about you. And then they want to learn more. They want to get to know you. They want to become an insider. And that's really what we're going for.
That's great. And just to reiterate, those of you who caught the video at the beginning of, it would have been at the end of last week, beginning of the month that I sent out, I really feel strongly that each event should have some type of 101 kind of component. So that kind of introductory, this is what we do, this is what we're about. I think so often we assume they know why they're here. They know why they're in the room, or they know why they're at this particular event. And even if they do, it's okay to remind them. And for those who are not sure who you are or what you do, it's super critical to ensure that everybody's on the same page and has that base understanding.
We think that we don't want to bore our existing base by telling them that same information over and over again. But if it's the 47th time that they've heard it, they can share that with the people they interact with. So it's still very valuable. So one of the clients that I've worked with was interested in hosting their first benefit dinner. They were only a couple years old in their ministry and still developing their story, gaining relational authority outside of the founder. And I suggested that instead of planning a benefit dinner, what would happen if we asked the existing base of advocates and ambassadors to host small, intimate parties in their homes 3 or 4 months ahead of your dinner or other signature event? They've accepted my alternate proposal, seeing the possibility of thinking small to go big. We really want to engage our core group and allow that to expand multiplication instead of addition.
I think that's really good, Tracy. I think that sometimes, again, the key pieces of today's presentation, or maybe some of them won't even be new information, it's just good to be reminded this is the strength that can come from an event. And that concept of keeping that multiplication, not addition concept, and what steps are we taking to ensure that is happening through these events, and that we're not just meeting a fundraising goal at the end of the day, but we're keeping the bigger picture in mind. I think that's really important. So thanks for that. Pointing that out, that's super critical.
And we've talked about, I know that some of the organizations on here looking at the poll that came in, you're established in your events. Consider going from big back to small to keep momentum. It's a thing to keep in mind as we go through this conversation. We'll touch on it again later as well.
That's great. I really like that.
Beyond our time together today, I'm also going to provide some digital assets. You can download those over at Signatry's Facebook group. Our first is a sample home host welcome letter. It's a document that I created to clearly communicate to home hosts what they're committing to and what the ministry can help them with. It's a simple one-page document with all the information needed to solicit home hosts. I hope it inspires you to craft communication that helps people make commitments because they know exactly what they're committing to. Mm. I also encourage you to get creative. One of the things that we've seen done is a museum display, regional statistics. Our son, way back when, helped to make bottles of water dirty to demonstrate on a table data about the organization that we were supporting. When he had to write a biography in 4th grade, he chose Dr. Florence Mawindi, the founder of LIA. So in doing that, he was created as an ambassador for life in abundance. And it's so much fun to see how an out-of-the-box engagement can have that kind of a lasting impact.
You know, Tracy, this didn't even occur to me the other day, but the cool part about some of these things is I think sometimes we have adult-only type events, right? I think the majority of us, when we think about a fundraising event, we're thinking about a dinner or a banquet or a gala or an auction or even a golf tournament. And how do we take what could be a parent's or an adult's or a grandparent's excitement and make it more a part of their family? Certainly family involvement, family legacy is a part of what we do here at the Signatry, but is critically, can be critically important to organizations, not only from a legacy perspective, but from just, you know, the more you can engage other members in the family with some hands-on type activity, like what your son did, the parents become more involved too, and where your time and your heart are, there your energy and excitement are as well, and you build in that ambassador.
Absolutely. And it's one of those, we tend to think that children are going to be a distraction from the message, when in fact you can really leverage that relationship to have ongoing communication in the home. It's amazing to think what could happen if you have a more casual event. There's something that the kids take home, a coloring sheet that you've created with facts and figures on your organization that might float around the home far longer than your marketing collateral, and have ongoing sort of backseat conversations that happen. And that's really what we're going for. We're going for making this a high impact legacy opportunity through a shared experience. And I really am going to encourage everyone to get very creative based on what it is that your focus is as a ministry, and find the ways to leverage that in the community beyond the traditional.
I like it.
So what you see here is a work day. This is not something that we would generally think of when we talk about raising funds, but it's exactly what we're talking about. We're saying we want to engage sponsors. These are people who probably already helped you or support you, but would call in all of their work buddies because of a specific skill set that you need. And they gain exposure to your organization as well. When you don't ask for help, or when you don't strategically ask for help, you really miss the opportunity to engage people who weren't already invested in the mission. You have to invite them in and then give them good communication, feed them well, spiritually and physically. Work parties will require good food.
Really, any party is going to require good food.
That's all it takes. Good food. Feed people good food. Tell them a great story and thank them for coming. World Cafe is one that we've been involved with, an African ministry. So people got to come have an Ethiopian coffee service and try injera. And it was not just informational, it was really an experience. And we're going for a shared experience. Fashion show, I wish I could take credit for this brilliant idea. The Single Mom Kansas City provides a free clothing boutique for the moms that they serve. So in the fall, they host a fashion show with clothing from their boutique and local designers for an annual fundraiser. And so you talk about engaging people with your story. It's just fantastic. And sometimes you have a film or documentary, something to share the story in a private theater environment or in a blitz across multiple churches in a metro area. It feels exciting and exclusive. It can be simple or extravagant. And these are all unique methods to engage sponsors using the resources, time, talents, and money that you have. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't host a benefit dinner, just that it shouldn't be viewed as the golden ticket without measuring readiness. So, when should you host a benefit dinner?
Which is a key question, right? I know that I get this fairly frequently when people feel like they are teetering on, I need an exposure event, I need something larger to engage a large number of people at one time. So what's the answer?
When it's the best possible way to share your story, a missionary from out of town, for example. When you have a developed story in the form of a video or other multimedia experience, so the movie screening would be an example. When your sponsors expect one. And that is probably one of the biggest reasons that I actually see nowadays. A sponsor will sometimes step up and say, no, I really want you to have it. Let me help underwrite it. And that's very obviously a moment where you go, well, I guess we're doing this thing. Mm-hmm. And then it's leveraging that in the most effective way possible.
I would say one piece, just to kind of dovetail onto that sponsor list expects it, is, what we learn in nonprofit leadership is everyone has an idea. So I think, yes, this is really a good clue that when they expect it, that maybe is something we should start thinking about. But if they expect it or are starting to wonder about it, I think it's really also an opportunity to engage them about, this is all that entails, and this is what I'll need help with. So it's not just writing the check, it's asking my friends, inviting my friends to be a part of it. So know that as Tracy lists that bullet point on there, I think that is certainly how a lot of fundraising, big events especially, get started. But that doesn't mean that that's an end-all be-all. Ensure that you're still clued into all the other pieces that involves.
Well, and the statistics, because we really want to be able to sit down and say that this is the value of an event like that. And ROI, or return on investment, can be hard to capture unless you're planning ahead and setting some clear goals. Is this a fundraising event, growing your donor base, or bringing awareness to the community you serve? And each will have its own set of metrics. If you're fortunate, your organization will intuitively understand that donor cultivation events are worthwhile, but you'll still do well to try to attempt to articulate why they're worthwhile and measure it. So we want to focus on metrics relating to sponsor acquisition versus fundraising. So the numbers I'm going to track look like number in attendance, new to the database, which means you need both a good response device and a database. You need to plan for new attendee engagement, the follow-up after the event, even if they don't give, because you are growing a relationship for future giving. You want to track the follow-up giving, the immediate giving and the residual, and the number attending a secondary event, which I'm always going to recommend that you have a secondary event. The benchmarks for each of these metrics is going to be dependent on your event and your organizational goals, but I really hope that helps you frame the question internally going forward.
Good. I think that's good. I think it's important, as you kind of outlined, that those are if you're focused on sponsorship. If you're focused on fundraising, those metrics look different, and there's nothing wrong with measuring both. In fact, I think you need to be measuring both, and in anything else that you want to do, but you need to know, and this will get into messaging, which I'm sure you'll talk about in a little bit. You're going to tailor some of your strategy of the event around what your measurables are. What are your goals of this event?
So, biblically speaking, we enter into the conversation of events as a talent to be managed. So, let us take a serious look at all there is to manage, everything that goes into it, because there is a lot to manage. It can be overwhelming, especially if you're not gifted in administration or peopling, and especially if you're already at capacity with ministry work. Anyone who has ever taken on the task of planning an event knows that there's a lot of moving parts. And though these parts change depending on your unique event, we regularly manage things like venue, catering, other contract negotiation, identifying and gaining sponsors to pre-fund the events, marketing and media, procurement for auctions or for gifts, and volunteer coordination. And I get so many questions on volunteer management that I'm just going to stop right here and address this vital piece. The golden number is that the standard ratio of guests to volunteers is 10-1. And that means that for every 100 guests, you should plan on having 10 volunteers. This will vary depending on the complexity of your event and how experienced your volunteers are. Honor capable, returning volunteers with team leader positions, especially if you have recurring events. Managing volunteers is a significant challenge. You're pulling together a team of people, many of whom you do not know well or at all, and asking them to fulfill critical tasks, often interacting directly with attendees without knowing their dedication to or understanding of your cause. It requires a lot of pre-planning, communication, and staging. And on the day of the event, I have to make extremely fast judgment calls on whether a volunteer will be capable at the task assigned, or if I need to suddenly pair them with a second volunteer to keep things on track. You also want this to be a positive experience for the volunteer. It's kind of like herding cats, well-intended cats, but cats. And I happen to be gifted in this way.
You know, Tracy, we talked about the importance of having somebody else to manage the volunteers.
Absolutely.
So determining ahead of time, hey, I know I'll probably be problem solving somewhere else or engaged in some other decision making along the way. I need someone devoted directly and completely to volunteers. And that doesn't mean just can you be in charge of volunteers. It means they need to have an idea of what's happening at the event. Mm-hmm. They need to be well versed in what your organization does, the ministry work that's happening, so you can trust that person to be essentially the leader of that critical group of people that are going to be interfacing with your attendees and doing very important tasks throughout the event.
Absolutely. You're looking for somebody who is very astute when it comes to managing people and who knows the story and the message, the values of your organization, so that they can weigh those decisions against the overall vision. There's a lot of those critical decisions that have to happen based on your organizational goals in a very rapid manner on the day of. I'm also going to say that it's really important you communicate early with clearly defined expectations. People are always more inclined to commit if they actually know what they're committing to, and then always follow up with a personal thank you. When volunteers arrive, I have them sign in. It's a very simple way to get their mailing address so that we can send them a thank you. A handwritten note in the mail is such a rare thing. It holds a great deal of value, and especially when written with meaning. Your volunteer coordinator should be taking notes of the roles that people are filling and making little notes as you go along through the day, whether on their phone, on the sign-in sheet, some way that that volunteer really stepped in and served in a great capacity so that your thank you notes can be personalized. I ask for volunteers based on what they want to do for us. It's important to identify those roles in advance of your event and know how many people you need who are good at what, and then go ask for those people to identify themselves. It's incredibly empowering when a volunteer shouts, "I love behind the scenes work," and then you let them work behind the scenes. Don't put them on registration or managing an auction when what they really want to do is fold all of your programs. Many of the volunteers as well will join the main audience and the meal and the program, but I'd like to also tell you that doesn't have to be the case. I know that 10-to-1 ratio can be really daunting sometimes when we start to calculate the financials of it. And so what I've seen is planning for a backstage party. It's a great alternative to seating your volunteers in the main event. Communicate it clearly to your volunteers. Ask the venue to set up a comfortable lounge. Many have soft seating that they can move into a workroom, and serve a pizza or a simple buffet. And if you do this, make sure that your guest speaker, president, founder, other VIPs and influencers make the rounds in this party atmosphere to thank the volunteers for their amazing work. It'll help share the mission of your organization, especially if they're missing that in the main hall.
It's a great idea, Tracy. I have never done that, and that really is a missed opportunity to make those people feel valued. Here's what I would also say is we talked about ambassadors, making, kind of transitioning those attendees to ambassadors at your events. You're doing that with your volunteers also. So this interaction is not just about ensuring I get my attendees signed up for the event and registered, or I have the auction baskets in the right order. It's also about equipping and valuing those volunteers, because when they feel like they've been a part of something bigger, they're going to be ambassadors also. So this really is not just a logistical management piece. This really is another way to enlist some future ambassadors into your organization.
Absolutely. We empower them with the mission. We authorize them to problem solve. We thank them for serving. And then we find creative ways to serve them. Sometimes that's praying with them, connecting them with someone at the event, share networking contacts, volunteer at another event with them, or ask them for help or their opinion on another project. And you really get an opportunity to move them very deep inside the organization all at once. We already talked about finding a dedicated manager. Someone can really help with the volunteer team. And this is our volunteer invitation letter. And so you get a script that comes in, and they can see what it is that you need and what they're committing to. And I recommend that this goes out in advance of the event, well in advance, save the dates, probably a month out. And then an additional email needs to go out a week ahead, and another email the day before, reminding people of arrival times and notifying them of any gotchas, whether that's parking or supplies that they're bringing. And again, you can find these bonuses over on the Signatory Facebook page. Great. That was a lot about volunteers.
All good information, though. Very, very good information. And I think in today's operating world, I don't know about you, Tracy, but if you've got a volunteer coordinator kind of running that, if there's even a group me that they might do a text string or something like that, that can also be a valuable way to communicate that last minute change of information.
Absolutely. One of the things that I do on all of my event agendas is I put my phone number and I put the phone numbers of any other key members of the team, so that all of that is handy and available to anyone that needs to have an agenda as part of the event. So we get back to logistics and we talk about decor and the guest experience, which may start well before the event if you have mailed invitations or a strong digital marketing campaign. The program, agenda, and entertainment. A high-profile guest speaker, please be sure to review their contract fully. Read the whole contract. Seemingly absurd requests like sorting M&Ms by color are their way of knowing quickly and visually that you've attended all the other more practical details they have requested. Invitations and RSVP management, including the dreaded seating chart, are things to consider as you manage the space. Take into account pre-function space, especially if you have activities or an auction. How close are your restrooms? We did one event in a big, beautiful tent, but the bathrooms were 200 feet away in the main lobby. Does the venue have tables that seat 8 or 10? Sometimes you have extra space and sometimes you don't. Know that the venue's listed capacity is not the same as the actual capacity. You cannot get 400 people in a room that it says it seats 400 people at banquet rounds once you add stage, tech, and other spaces. So dimensions between tables, locations of food stations, space for the projectors, exit signs popping up over your main stage, pillars in front of your keynote, chandeliers that cast shadows on your screen. All things to take into account as you plan your space. And then comes the question of alcohol and auctions. But let us be unafraid to address these. When it comes to serving alcohol, it's a really common question, and there isn't a right answer. You have to know your audience and make a judgment call. And this may be a board decision. I never recommend an open bar, but 1 to 2 drink tickets or wine with dinner and a cash bar that includes soft drinks is often well received. It'll depend entirely on your mission and your audience, and it's your job to know your audience. As for auctions, an auction is a second concurrently running event. If you decide that an auction is right for you, do your research. There's some proven formulas for auctions. Most people have unrealistic expectations regarding fundraising goals. So let me introduce you to some numbers. Our minimum recommended event attendance for a live auction is 150 people, more if you have higher dollar items. Studies tell us that church-going Christians give 4 to 6% of their income to the church and are probably willing to give up to 10% of their income to the cause. So you may only have 4% of their income remaining available for giving. Take this into account as you acquire items so your big ticket items aren't out of range for your audience. When in doubt, call a few of your core sponsors. Ask them if the item and the price point are interesting to them. They'll likely feel special that you included them in the conversation. They might even help you spread the news of an exciting item. You'll want to have a professional auctioneer for a live auction. This is money well spent, and they can also advise you on mandated local, state, and federal reporting.
I will tell you also, in my experience working with, this is Kristen, sorry, for those of you listening, in my experience working with auctioneers, they want to know what the dynamic of the room is like. Because in any given situation, they may have the same item that will bring $5,000 in one crowd, and they'll be working hard to get $1,000 for the same item in a different crowd. So it is really it's due diligence on your part, and certainly a great asset to them, because it can feel very awkward if you're in a room and the auctioneer is asking for an amount that you know is not going to happen. And that just means there's not, that pre-work has not been done at educating him or her and what the dynamic of that room is.
So when we get into some of the math, you can expect a live auction to garner 66 to 75% of your fundraising goal, usually with 7 to 14 items, as we're talking about that 150 plus mark. The silent auction items will make up the rest. I recommend 1 auction item for every 2 giving units or 4 people in attendance. Generally, because of how the math works out, I recommend against auctions. They have a tendency to distract from the storyline of your event. They are a ton of extra work. And instead, moving to a cash and carry sale model where you have gift cards for restaurants, local amenities, car washes, things that you can sell at face value, which is 100% retail value, instead of the 60 to 70% that you'll see at an auction.
I think that's a great idea, Tracy. I had not heard of that whole cash and carry concept before, have not been in an event with that. And I think that really kind of streamlines things and takes a lot of the unknown and, quite frankly, the anxiety on behalf of the development person or the event planner on how is this going to work or is this not going to work?
Absolutely. We spend a bunch of time out there, soliciting gift card donations, whether that's, from stores, restaurants, service providers, and groomers, and all sorts of things that we use on a daily basis and that are fun things that you might already be doing. And people will walk up to this fun display, pick out which one they want, and go cash out. And at the end of the day, it didn't cost you anything, where auction items can sometimes cost you, especially if you're going for some of the larger like service play auction events. And for a little bit of packaging and an extra person handling money, you can do cash and carry and get 100% profit. The worst case is that you don't sell all of them and they turn into donor gifts, and they roll over to the next event. And so it's a very simple model as far as how people interact with the fundraising. And for me, I'm trying to streamline the story and the interaction. When you split people's focus between 5 different ways to give at a single event, you stand to confuse them. And confusion is the enemy. You also, if you do choose to have an auction, will need to put special budget aside for packaging, staging, pickup and delivery, signs, really good signs. You may need to rent easels, table risers, additional tables and linens. Sometimes bags, baskets, and bows are needed. Factor in the additional floor space as well. People won't buy what they can't see. And consider an app or an online service for advanced digital bidding. But I urge you to seriously consider if an auction helps to enhance your message and engage sponsors at your event. So, all right.
That's good. I think that's really good advice, especially because what you don't know is, if you've never tried it before, it might sound exciting because you know other people are doing it. I cannot articulate to you enough the amount of work that goes into both a silent and a live auction item. So, good advice.
This is my event planning timeline. It's a tool that I use with all of my clients. And so as we dive in together and create a detailed plan for a successful event, this is where we start. Ideally, we'll have 12 months to plan an event, which I know sounds luxurious to many of you. It is possible to condense this timeline, but you do not get to skip over the details. They just have to be completed on an accelerated timeline. This will also be available on the Facebook page, and I hope that you will all use it.
Yeah, very valuable.
So before we go any farther, I really want to talk about vendor negotiation. It's one of my biggest pet peeves when a ministry group devalues services or goods because they don't know what fair market value is. So I ask that you do your research, call around for quotes, and know that if the lowest cost chicken dinner in town is $36, your nonprofit status isn't going to get you down to $26, no matter how much you fuss. The venue might be your largest expense, but they are also your greatest ally for guest experience. As you evaluate if this tool, an event, is right for your ministry long-term, recognize that you get what you pay for. And while you may be able to get a cheap dinner at the local VFW, that's probably not very enticing or an inspiring atmosphere. You will likely spend more money on decor, AV, and other elements of guest experience when you might have negotiated a very fair price at a destination venue for the same net total. Be mindful of service fees, which are often in the 20% range and which is customary, and factor in extras like coffee and parking. valet or reserved lots may be necessary for a crowded downtown venue. So what do we know about benefit dinners? They cost a lot of money. They should be part of an overall one-year engagement strategy, and they use a lot of resources beyond money. Doesn't mean they're bad. They just aren't the answer for everyone. They're a tool to be leveraged. So let's play with some numbers and put this into perspective. The model I run has been hybridized, but a similar organization, Mission Increase Foundation, has accumulated data in best case scenarios. They estimate that you will receive $175 per person or $350 per couple. Taking the 280 guest round number minus staff and volunteers, that could net you $42,000. Best case, if you use this big event to engage in storytelling and move your sponsors deeper into the giving funnel. You could increase that number through residual giving. Some numbers suggest that commitments received on the night of a dinner will be renewed for 4 to 5 years, resulting in a higher net gain, if you get it right.
If you get it right. I think that's the thing, is don't walk away. If you're going to take one piece of information away from this webinar, don't take away that slide. And that should not be your takeaway, because there are so many things that go into 4 or 5 years of renewed giving. A lot of engagement, and part of that one-year strategy, continuing to bring them into the fold of what your ministry does and down that funnel. So don't count on that. That takes a lot of additional work.
It
to make
takes
that
a
happen.
lot of work. And what we know is that somewhere around the 3-year mark, that residual begins to fall off unless you are really being intentional about those engagements and renewing the relationships with those donors. And so it really is this long-term game plan for engagement fueled by the opportunity gained at an event.
Tracy, I have had a couple of questions come across that are related more in particular, I think, to that ask or to kind of the more formal event that we just kind of walked through. So before we get into this next generation and maybe some other additional ideas, I want to kind of get your feedback on a couple of thoughts, a couple of questions. So one of the questions that we received was, how do I continue to track that this gift is related to an event? So let's say we have a banquet or a gala in March, and I get a gift in July from someone who attended in March. Do I attribute it to that event? What happens if it happens in October or at year end? At what point do we dotted line that gift and credit it to the event?
And it's going to go back to that ROI and how you're managing your statistics. If you have some sort of a client database that you're using, there's a bunch of free ones out there or low cost ones. That there's really no reason not to have a CRM anymore. And so those are tools that I'm sure you can recommend, that you have some favorite ones. And you really want to be able to point to, this was our first contact.
Right.
This is when they came into the database. And so we know based on that's when they joined that was the jumping off point. At some point, it gets a little messy.
Right.
You're not going to be able to tell immediately, especially as you do get out into the 3 to 5 year range. But that's sort of renewed ongoing, because we're going to assume that they came in and they engaged and they attended the event again.
Right.
And that you'll see that those move from I attended the event and I gave to I'm hosting a table and I brought 8 people with me to I'm hosting 2 tables and one of my people has a table. And to watch that kind of growth happen.
That multiplication.
The multiplication is really what we're going for as far as sitting back and looking at the numbers and winning.
Well, and I would tell those of you listening that what we know is that donors typically give a gift for the first time and overwhelmingly do not give again. The statistics can range anywhere between 50% and 70% do not give again. So I would look at this as you want the initial gift and then you want an additional gift. And that additional gift, it comes from really sharing impact and engaging that donor in the bigger vision of what you have going on. So you want to really engage them first at this event and then the piece afterwards. So if it's a first time gift and they attended the event, you can attribute it to the event, certainly, because that's where the initial exposure happened. After that, it really becomes a function of development, how you are going to expand that relationship. Another question, Tracy, is how do you know when your event has run its course? You have done this sort of same model. I've done the same banquet or the same gala or the same whatever engaging event. How do I know when it's time to do something new?
When people are exhausted and it suddenly feels like it's a whole lot of extra work. That's probably the biggest reason. You've lost your committee chair who has planned it for you for the past 7 years. Nobody is stepping up to take it on. It's time for a refresh. How does that get reimagined so that people can be excited about it again?
Or you're not engaging new people, right?
It's only self-serving.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So lots of things to really consider. And then again, do I scratch it all together or do I give it a little bit of a facelift?
Correct.
You say that's
fair. And I think that a lot of times what we look at is it fits the calendar as far as overall organizational goals. We do it every summer. We have this thing. The summer might still work for you. The exact fit and function might need to change.
Or opposite. The same.
Right. Why are we doing this while we're already halfway into our year when it's very obvious that we should be pre-funding our year as part of the story as we engage people? We run a program year, for example, with the school district because we serve in schools. Well, hosting in October when we're already part of the way in is a little bit disconnected when we could host something in the spring or in the summer gearing up for our fall launch.
Right.
And that's all part of the storytelling and the timeline for your organization. That's not going to fit for everybody.
Okay, 2 more quick questions and then I'll let you move on to what you wanted to talk about. The first one, and maybe this isn't so much a question as it is kind of an alert to those of us who are listening and learning today. And that is, I know for me, I've been a part of an event before where the timing is working and everything is good and we have a great track record and something in the environment changes. Now that could be weather related, it could be sports related, it could be something culturally happening in your city. An example would be here in Kansas City, an attended event one weekend. It was a well-known event and it happened to fall on the same weekend at a near facility that the Royals were getting their rings after they won the World Series. So no need to cancel the event or to move it. Obviously, it was really important to that organization, but logistics had to be managed. So I think sometimes as an event coordinator or development officer, you get really absorbed with what's going on with your organization and how this is supposed to fit for you. And you may have to rethink timing. You may have to rethink logistics. So just be aware of things that are happening around you, and they may be more than a gotcha that you're going to have to text your volunteers about.
Oh yeah.
It could be something pretty critical to how the timing of your event is even going to flow that evening.
Well, and it's one of those things, people always laugh seeing the number of school schedules that I have downloaded on my computer because we're constantly double checking, well, who has a school break on that date?
Yes.
Do we need to factor in family vacations? For some of our major givers, are they out of the state in the summer?
Right.
What kind of atrophy happens just because life is happening that you could have foreseen? Right. Whether that's sports schedules, concert schedules, school schedules, the weather, that all plays into the logistics. And I really recommend it that year out. You may not be able to see all of them, but sitting there with all of those schedules to verify your dates.
Certainly. Okay, last question. Relative to kind of that formal event, what aspects, as you are standing up there, it's a fundraising event, I'm going to make my ask. What needs to be part of that question or that time up when I have everyone's attention and I'm going to make a compelling request for support? What do you, from an event perspective, what have you seen that works and what's important to include?
There's some coaching we always give. The first is make the room quiet, which seems simple, but is harder to do than you think at first glance. It takes some clear communication with the venue staff of who that is on the agenda that they need to be silent for, to remove those distractions. And then the ask really needs to come in 3 parts. The first part is a really great story about the hero, and you are not the hero. I suggest some story brand research if you're unfamiliar with the terms. You are the guide, and we want to introduce people to the hero. And then you want to have your accountant come up. The bean counter in the room should come up and talk to all the left brain people and tell them why your numbers are very winning numbers and what your goal is, what your stretch goal is, and what your crazy awesome, wouldn't it be amazing goal is, and why these are really important numbers. And then your visionary should present, and this should really wrap up your ask. This is your president, a board member, your founder, the missionary that you're supporting, someone who's really front lines, high level. This is why it's so important and valuable that we're here doing this and you're part of it, with the invitation to be in. And plan plenty of time after the ask so that people aren't checking their watches as you get to the end there. Kristen and I were joking about opportunity lost and the costs associated with that as we run overtime at a benefit dinner. Any sort of an event with an ask, if people are watching their clocks, they are not focused on your message. And we really want to avoid that. That's something that we can build into the agenda.
And I think that goes to scripting. As much as I think some of us don't like the idea of scripting, it really becomes a tool that you can use to ensure you are staying on time and you are respecting those that are in attendance and their time.
Absolutely.
All right, we got a couple more minutes, Tracy. What are you gonna tell us?
So we definitely don't want to leave our current donor base behind, but we do want to consider ways to engage the next generation. And what we're hearing for now is that the traditional gala or fundraising dinner isn't as enticing to the next generation as to their boomer counterparts. I see many established nonprofit organizations with a young professionals group, catering specifically to the growth of their next generation of supporters with fresh, less formal, more intimate engagements. And so it really is just a question, what's on the horizon for your organization? As we move from transactional to transformational events, we really want to reimagine, reach people through experiences, and really think about what do you want people to see and understand about your ministry work, and how can you involve them in that. And then we have an invitation for you. For those of you that are in the Kansas City area, the Signatory will be hosting us for a deep dive workshop, and we would like you to email Kristen to reserve your place. The space is limited, but it will be a great intimate opportunity to sit down and come up with some strategies for your next successful event. And that's whether you'd like help refining an existing event or creating a new one. I hope you can join us.
That's great. Is that it? Are we good?
We have a little bit more.
All right, let's do a couple more.
Because I just wanted to say there's a lot of opportunities to be distracted from your work when it comes to an event. And we really, really want to have you focused on your ministry work. And so what are the ways that you make that happen in your organization? For me, I want to make that possible for you. We all have our calling, and mine is event coordinator and all of the strategy that goes with that. I love this infographic from USA Today, and because when you're stressed and disconnected from your calling, it's very, very hard to stay on mission in the moments of opportunity at your event. And that stress negatively affects your impact for the greater kingdom outside of even your organization.
All right. Anything additional that you'd like to leave us with? I think we do have maybe another question or two, so let me look at those. I know I've had a couple of requests for handouts, and I will make sure I get those onto the Facebook page. So what you need to do to find those handouts that Tracy has shown us is just go to the Signatory Ministry Services Facebook page, and those will be uploaded on Friday. If you have any trouble finding any of those, please feel free to send me an email, and I'd be happy to get them to you. We do, as always, we record these webinars. We will also be sharing that, both with those who have attended, and then we will also share it on the Facebook page. So you can always find it there. I think this has been some really valuable information. I hope that those of you who were able to tune in got your questions answered and were able to hopefully take a step back and really evaluate, is what I'm doing working? Maybe it is, and you picked up some fine points of things that you can add or tweak or change. So Tracy, thank you so much for sharing your insider tips. I feel like maybe we should have titled this the insider perspective or insider tips, because I know that those listening certainly benefited from how practical steps and how to plan a successful strategic event.
Thank you so much for having me. One of my goals this year is really to share more of what I've learned, and to have this opportunity has been a ton of fun. I could sit and talk about events all day.
Very good. Well, we'll have an opportunity, maybe not all day, but certainly those of you who are located in Kansas City or close and are willing to make the drive in, we will have a workshop. There was no date on that workshop when Tracy posted that. That will be to be determined. So first step for you, if you're interested, is to email me your interest, and then I will send back out a couple of dates that we'll be kind of waffling between to determine what our best date is. Certainly we're coming on to that busy springtime, so I want to make sure that we can help as many ministries as possible. Again, space is limited, but we want it to be a valuable hands-on time for those who are able to attend. Also, mark your calendars for April 24th. We'll be focused on cultivating high-capacity donors. Regardless of where your organization is in its fundraising plan, major donors are a key to your development strategy. So Chris Willard, who is co-author of Contagious Generosity, will join us to share keys to cultivating high-capacity donors for your organization. You'll get to learn insights that he's gained over his many years in growing the hearts of donors. So what did you learn today? As we close up here, what notes did you take? Don't file them away. Circle, discuss it with your development staff or your executive director or your volunteer staff. What needs to be tweaked? What needs to be added? What perhaps needs to be scrapped and tried in a completely different way? I think there certainly is this balance in engaging these different generations. So what is working with one may not work with our millennials, and we certainly want to find ways to engage them as well. And that may not be at the same event. So we need to certainly keep our eyes and ears open to what possibilities we have to grow and improve with our organizations. So thanks again, Tracy, for spurring us on and how to evaluate and improve our events. To those of you who are listening, if I can be of help to you, as always, do not hesitate to contact me. I am here to help equip you in your development efforts and partner with you in your major donor conversations and major donor efforts. So send me an email if you're interested in that event planning workshop. check on Facebook for those value-added pieces of information Tracy is sharing. Those will be there on Friday. Look me up on LinkedIn, and we look forward to visiting with you and talking with you again in April. Thanks so much. Have a great day.